Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is Scott Bradfield. We're going to do a quick one, I hope. This is the latest in the series we're doing called "In the Footsteps of Astounding." I enjoyed this history of Astounding magazine and John W. Campbell many months ago. We've done a few episodes. As I get older, and I'm getting older every day, I know every day I just think I'm going to die. I realize I'm going to die, so I think about this almost every day, sometime during the day. And I think so. I've pretty much all my bathtub reading. It's about half hour a day or 45 minutes, but you can get a lot done that's non-productive. And it's non-productive reading that we're talking about. I read a lot of stuff from when I was a kid, and the Astounding kind of was fun because it kind of connected me to a lot of the old science fiction I read as a kid. And one of the writers I loved, and a lot of people loved this guy. I'm really interested in this at this point in my life, is Isaac Asimov. Now, I read Isaac Asimov when I was like 14 or 15. The first science fiction books I probably ever read were the Foundation books. And I'm sure they were among the very first science fiction books I had ever read. And why I read them, I read Ray Bradbury, and I wanted more like that. And this is not at all like Ray Bradbury, and I got it. And I read this and the whole trilogy, I think in a weekend at my dad's. I remember not being able to put it down. And I remember my dad and my brother saying, put those stupid books away. I couldn't. I loved these books, and I read Asimov and some of his short stories, and I'm trying to remember what else I'd read. I never had read the robot stories. He was best known for these robots. Well, not best known. He was also known for writing I, Robot. Many of you probably only know I, Robot because of the stupid movie. What's his name? Excuse me. I always get something on my face when I'm doing these things. There's a stupid Will Smith movie, which I don't think has anything to do with iRobot, but this is the book. And I actually got the old copy I had when I was a kid. And I never read this as a kid. So that's a long preamble to say I have now read iRobot. And I had stopped reading Asimov. I guess, like Bradbury, I read for a long time. But Asimov I read for a while, and then I kind of quickly went off him for some reason. He was a big celebrity. He was always on television. He was always a talk show guest, and he was always talking about things. He was a very likable person on TV, and he was a fairly progressive intelligence, as I recall. And his books are certainly filled with ideas of having people of every sort of nation and and men and women and equally involved in all these kind of scientific pursuits. And he had a kind of a rational view of the future that suggested that science could make human life better, even though human beings were kind of awful a lot of the time. I think that's a fair summation, and that human beings aren't very logical, and they need machines to help them behave logically. Okay, so I read iRobot. And the other thing I put me off Asimov is I found him a really awkward. As I got older, his prose is really clumsy. He's a really clumsy prose writer, and it just almost every few sentences are jumpy and weird. But there's still something really powerful about his ideas and the way he tells stories. Very quickly, iRobot covers the history of like 100 years in the course of how robots are designed to help human beings. And that's the best way to describe it. There are a series of stories that he wrote, most of which were written for Astounding magazine and John W. Campbell, who helped him write the 3 rules of robotics. And I always found this really boring every time I heard someone talk about the 3 rules of robotics. But basically, the principle is that robots are designed with 3 principles: take care of human beings is the first job, and they basically can't hurt human beings. That's basically the 3 rules of robotics, and they're supposed to do a good job otherwise. So he has these little 3 rules, and in the course of the stories, in each story, the different designers, and there's a robot psychologist named Susan Calvin, I believe, and it covers the history of all these robots and how they go through these different advancements in the production of robots. And each of the stories is sort of a puzzle story, the kind of thing I don't normally like. At the same time, I read this over the past few days as kind of an antidote. Our last book was a very disturbing book, which is Ben Sinister. And this is sort of an antidote. It's a really, really fun book. And it still holds up, even though, of course, it takes place, I think, in like today. Like by now, we're supposed to be all over the universe. And Thank God we're not. Thank God we're not doing what we're doing on this planet all over the universe. Anyway, this series of stories are about this series of problems they come up with when they design these robots. And each one of them is still interesting, and they're kind of little philosophical arguments. I forgot a lot about them. Well, in one of the stories, they find a robot who, for some reason, he comes up with a irrational religious idea that robots are, that he's connected to God, that God made robots and then made human beings next. I hope that's a correct summation. And I forget what story that is. I think it's I want to say it's called Reason. And the robot's argument is that God must have made me first because I'm much better than you are. Now, there's the long story that goes on there in which these two psychologists or these two engineers try to see what they could do with this robot because it's living under this terrible misassumption that it's God, that God that it's the chosen one, and human beings are basically just somebody he's taking care of because it doesn't interrupt his responsibilities to take care of human beings. He can look down at them. He can think he's better, and it's a really interesting idea. It still holds up, and the conclusion of the story is great. I'll give you one or two more quick ideas. There's another story in here in which a robot develops telepathy, and the robot can figure out what people are thinking. And now the 3 rules of robotics, which you'll have to read yourself because I find them boring, but the responsibility of the robot is to do things for human beings and to make their lives better and to serve them and to do good things for them. Well, once the robot is reading our minds, it starts to empathize with us. And it realizes that sometimes to make human beings happier, it must lie to people. I think that story is just called Liar. Yes, it's a story called just Liar. And it's another great idea. And this robot is meeting people, it's telling them lies. And it only tells lies if it's going to be better for people. But every once in a while, the people find out they've been lied to, and they get kind of hurt. But then they go through these logical arguments through it that, well, you can't do anything about the fact they'll be hurt. At least you made them happier for a certain amount of time. So the robots are doing everything rationalistically about how to do the best you possibly can for these miserable human beings, and that's what they do. They don't think otherwise. There's a number of arguments in the book and through the stories about when the robots are making correct decisions, and human beings are trying not help them make those correct decisions. And they become philosophical and social and political arguments in each story, which is slightly different. There's one other story where they create a robot who is able to help design a hyperdrive. And in order for this robot to help the human beings, it has to possibly do things that might harm the human beings. So they design a special robot, which I hope I'm correctly remembering this story, which will do things that might actually harm the human beings it's working with. And it's modified slightly so that you can't really tell that it's different from any of the other robots. So they create this special robot. And it's a bit of a danger because it could possibly harm human beings. That's the way Susan Calvin, the robot psychiatrist. She's a robot psychiatrist or psychologist. She's got to deal with, so what happens at one point is this robot is created, and one of the designers gets really fed up with it because it's an annoying robot. It's constantly pestering everybody. And so at one point he says, just piss off. Get the hell out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. And the robot hides. He hides with all the other robots. It's a really funny story. And then as he's hiding, they try to figure ways of catching this robot and bringing it back because they're afraid that it's going to infiltrate all the other robots. And it starts to hide among the other robots because it wants to continue doing its job, what it's been assigned to do. And so it starts to infiltrate and starts to affect the other robots. Each one of the stories I really enjoyed, I have to say. They're very awkwardly written. The prose at the prose level, but there's something about Asimov's fiction, and particularly in these books, the Foundation books and in I, Robot. And I'm going to read some more Asimov. I'm going to try reading some of the late stuff eventually. That still really holds up. And there's a definite intelligence in the books asking the question over and over again, how can you help human beings live a good life when human beings are so complexly awful? That's how I kind of interpret it in many ways. They're kind of it's kind of an important stuff to be reading today. Okay, anyway, I had a lot of fun with I, Robot. I would recommend it if you like science fiction. It's dated, it's clumsily written, and it was real fun. I had a lot of fun with it, and I want to do the Foundation books eventually again too. All right, bye.